The votes are still coming in from some of the key counties, that key county of Maricopa County in Arizona, and theoretically, there are enough votes out there to change the result.
I think Trump has a reasonable argument in Arizona. Their campaign does, rather. They're concerned about what are called the late early ballots. Democrats sent their mail ballots in very soon when they were available. Republicans took a lot longer. So the ones that straggled in on Monday and Tuesday, there was a big batch released earlier, were actually about plus 17 for Trump. That would put the margin at a point where it would be very close in the end.
Okay, then let's take a look at Nevada. We're likely to get those results tomorrow. The gap is very small right now, but almost all the votes have been counted.
Yeah, that is not good news for Trump, I don't think. There, the mail vote is very heavily Democratic, so that will most likely expand Biden's currently small lead.
And back to Pennsylvania, and we saw this thing that we call the Red Mirage play out all night long in Michigan and Wisconsin yesterday. Donald Trump had big leads when you looked at the day vote, the day of election vote. As the mail votes were counted in both those states, Joe Biden took over. He was far further behind in Pennsylvania, closing in right now. How does it look now?
I think it looks bad for the president. If you just kind of extrapolate out how far Joe Biden is behind based on the percent reporting, and you extrapolate out to 100, Biden eventually wins by around 200,000 votes, so it should be about 3 or 4%. It may not even be close in the end. There has to be something very different somehow in the remaining votes that are very, very blue, and where Biden is way ahead of the numbers he needs so far.
Okay, Nate Silver, thanks very much. Let's bring in Mary Bruce and Cecilia Vega. Mary Bruce for the Biden campaign. We just heard from Nate. It's very tough, according to him, for the president in Pennsylvania. That's exactly what the Biden campaign thinks.
Yeah, George, they are optimistic about Pennsylvania, but they are also confident that they're going to flip Arizona and take Nevada. The Biden team this evening sees that the White House is within their reach. Joe Biden has been very cautious not to declare victory yet, while also making it very clear that he believes he will be the next president of the United States. He is urging the country now to keep the faith, to be patient while this process plays out, but also stressing repeatedly that this process, that this election and these votes being counted, this is up to the people. This is up to the American process, and trusting in that it is not up to the president. He is saying that the country will not be bullied, that they will not surrender in any way here. And George, a sign of how confident they are is the fact that Joe Biden is already looking ahead to uniting the country. We saw him make those broad appeals today, stressing that he will be a president for all Americans and saying it is time for this country to stop treating its opponents like enemies. George.
Very confident last night. Were there points, confident right now, but were there points last night where they thought they were in peril?
There were certainly points last night where you saw that confidence waning. There were a lot of moments in the night where you heard them stop saying that they were so confident and simply saying they were hopeful and optimistic. But, George, that simply did not last very long. As they continued to see the numbers coming in, the margins, they felt that it simply was too much in so many of these critical states, especially in the blue wall states, for Donald Trump to be able to overcome and take this race.
Okay, Mary, thanks. Let's go to Cecilia Vega at the White House, fighting on all fronts.
Oh, George, they are fighting on all fronts. We did not see President Trump in person today, but we are hearing from people who are close to him that I got to tell you, he is in a down mood behind the scenes. He is starting to concede, at least to people around him, that he is seeing this lead slip away. People on his team are holding out hope for Arizona. That is the one state that they've got their eye on right now, big time. But we are also hearing from aides who feel like the writing is on the wall. The president has been on the phone all day talking to allies, particularly Republican governors. He's had multiple phone calls with the governor of Arizona, who is convincing the White House that he is seeing this very narrow margin of votes right now, that the White House, the Trump team, could end up having a solid chance there. Now, the president's legal team, you said it, fighting on all fronts. They have filed motion after motion after motion today. This has really become a Hail Mary strategy. We're talking about 2 lawsuits in Pennsylvania, 1 in Michigan, 1 in Georgia, a recount request in Wisconsin. Late tonight, the White House press secretary said that this could end up going all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Meantime, for President Trump, he is continuing to push these unfounded conspiracy theories that this election is being stolen from him by Democrats. When reality, George, of what we're seeing is democracy in action. It is working exactly the way it is supposed to be working. Every vote so far is being counted. And listen to this, something we've not seen in this country, something we hear about often in election overseas. International elections observers now condemning what they are seeing here in our country, saying that the president is undermining democratic institutions.
And Cecilia, you may not have an answer to this, but if in the next 24 to 36 hours we get clear results in Arizona, we get clear results in Pennsylvania, you think there's any chance the president stands down?
Well, I don't know, George. Look, he said he didn't want to see any funny games. This is also a president who has told us very clearly he is not someone who likes to lose. So we shall see.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. We'll be right back.
I will never apologize for love.
Were you talking to Dale before the show started?
Congratulations, you've just blown up the Bachelorette. Bachelor Nation has questions.
Claire's gone. What just happened?
They are going to win this race for the White House. That was today. I want to go to Juju Chang in Michigan, where earlier this evening we were able to project that Joe Biden will win the state of Michigan after, due to a surprisingly orderly vote counting process in the state of Michigan.
Absolutely, George. It was a bleak night of early returns, but Joe Biden was able to come back. Even though he looked as though he was down for the count, he got back up and stitched together a winning coalition using women from the suburbs and black voters in metropolitan areas in places like Detroit. Now, you said we have projected him to win with 99% of the votes tallied by a margin of about 150,000 votes. That's 10 times the margin by which candidate Trump beat Hillary Clinton here in 2016. Now, President Trump responded by filing those lawsuits, and here he claimed that there was a lack of meaningful access to vote count centers. But within hours, protesters showed up at one of those vote counting centers in Detroit shouting, "Stop the count." But I must tell you that these centers are open to the public. They're also open to the press, maybe with COVID restrictions and limited capacity, but they are also open to bipartisan poll challengers. Those challengers are deemed 600 of them across the state, 300 from each party, and they are there trained to monitor. And this situation here, as far as the polling centers were concerned, were courteous and earnest and the very best of democracy. George?
Juju Chang, thanks very much. Let's bring in Jocelyn Benson right now, the Secretary of State of Michigan. Secretary Benson, thank you for joining us tonight. From your perspective, how did the vote counts go? Is Michigan, I know it's not official yet, but do you think the count is basically what we're going to see going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the tabulations are pretty much finished right now in our largest jurisdictions. Things are wrapping up with some final things that have to be done before the results, once tabulated, are published. So we're pretty much wrapping things up here in Michigan in terms of the unofficial tabulation. And yeah, as was mentioned, our precincts, voting in precincts on Tuesday went smoothly. The tabulation at our absentee counting boards was smooth and transparent. This was really a great experience for a lot of folks who were able to get real eyes on the process because we saw more people vote than ever before in Michigan's history, and we saw the tabulation go smooth, efficiently, securely, and accurately.
How about this claim from the Trump campaign that they didn't have adequate access and transparency into the process?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really line up with the facts in our experience here in the state, where we actually have, bipartisan poll watchers and a number of other people, a lot of people with eyes on the process. But we also know at this moment in where we are, we always knew we'd be here from when the polls closed. As we went through that tabulation, there would be a lot of efforts to undermine people's perceptions about the integrity of our process. But we've always had a lot of faith in the truth underneath our work, which everyone can see for itself is one that has been meticulous, it has been accurate, it has been secure, and it's been something that we're quite proud of here in our state.
Secretary Benson, thanks for your time tonight. I want to go to Pennsylvania right now. The vote's still being counted in Pennsylvania. Eva Pilgrim is there.
Good evening, George. Yeah, they're really making progress and getting those ballots counted. We are now under the million mark of ballots left to be counted, those mail-in ballots. We started off at the election day with 2.5 million ballots that needed to be counted. And we do know some information about those ballots that still are outstanding. Those ballots are from areas that are the big cities of the state of Pennsylvania, around Pittsburgh and the suburbs there, Philadelphia and the suburbs here. And that's why, even though Trump is up just slightly, still, you're starting to see the difference between the two candidates narrow as these returns come in. The Biden campaign actually feels really good because these ballots are from areas that are Democratic strongholds. I talked to a ballot counter today who says they have been working tirelessly. They are trying to get these ballots counted. They've been working in 4-hour shifts in Montgomery County. And she actually told me something that was a bit reassuring when I was talking to her, that she looked around the room and there were people of all races, all socioeconomic backgrounds, George, and they all had this mission together to get these ballots counted for their community. And there was this real sense of purpose amongst that group, George.
Thank you, Eva. We're joined now by the Pennsylvania Secretary of State, Kathy Bookfar. Ms. Bookfar, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And just give us an update right now where things stand in the vote count in Pennsylvania.
Thanks so much for having me on, George. So things have been going great. The counties have been counting around the clock. Everybody's tired but incredibly dedicated to getting this done. So even just in the last several hours, several 100,000 ballots were counted, and I'm looking at the clock, and I think there's still some being counted in these hours as well. So I think we are under 1 million ballots, mail ballots left at this point, and so the counties are getting closer, and so are the races.
So should we expect something approaching a final result by tomorrow or Friday?
So, and I want to be clear, and I know that you know this, but of course we don't have final results for a while, right? So these are all unofficial results. And what I've been saying, I originally had been saying we're actually ahead of schedule of where I thought we'd be. So I've been saying that I thought the overwhelming majority of ballots would be counted by Friday. I now believe that the overwhelming majority of ballots will be counted by tomorrow. But again, military and overseas ballots are not due till a week we still have provisional ballots, and we also have ballots that arrive after 8 p.m. on November 3rd, which our Supreme Court has allowed to be counted as long as they were cast by November 3rd and received by 5 p.m. on November 6th.
Any sense of how big a universe of ballots that is?
Not yet. There were actually fewer ballots that arrived today in a couple of counties that I asked about it than I expected, which is great. And it means that we did bilingual radio, TV, digital, mail, emails, text, everything we could do to make sure voters knew that they should get it in as soon as possible. And that seemed to have worked. And most voters, in fact, I think we surpassed 2.6 million mail-in and absentee ballots cast.
The Trump campaign and other Republicans have started to mount a series of legal challenges to the ballot. What's your response to that? Do you think it will make a difference?
I don't. I think, they're, bringing those cases in many states around the country. What we care about here is making sure that every qualified voter, that their vote counts, that their voices get heard, and we want to make sure no voter is disenfranchised when they're a qualified voter. So we're going to count every vote, and hey, that's what makes our democracy great.
Let's go out west now to Arizona. Whit Johnson is there in Phoenix. Joe Biden has held a lead through most of the counting, but some new votes are coming in. It's getting tighter.
Yeah, George, Joe Biden is still holding on to that lead, although it is a slight lead, and both campaigns are really working their mathematical jujitsu to try to find a path forward. The Trump campaign at one point today suggested that not only would they win Arizona, but that they could come back and win by as many as 30,000 votes. The Democrats, on the other hand, think that this race is just too far out of reach. They point to, both sides are pointing to some narratives that actually work. If you look at the numbers here, and let me back up and explain what we're waiting on tonight, and that is these absentee ballots, most of them from Maricopa County, about 400,000 just from Maricopa County here, but total statewide, we're looking at about 600,000 outstanding ballots. Now, these are specifically those absentee ballots that were sent to voters, but that they actually came back and turned in, dropped off in person, either on Election Day or on the weekend prior. Now, the Trump campaign points to the fact that people who dropped off their ballots on Election Day, they're kind of lumping them in with the people who voted on Election Day. And they had data that suggested that they were going to outnumber Biden supporters on Election Day here in Arizona by a ratio of 4-1. So they like the fact that some of these late voters they think could help them. But Democrats point to the fact that, look, this is Maricopa County. This is an area that has been leaning to the left, especially in this race. They think if most of the ballots are coming from here, the Democrats like their odds. George, I also want to mention the Senate race because there is a potential scenario that we should point out here. Mark Kelly is actually outperforming Joe Biden, and there is that potential, and we've seen it happen before, where they split the ticket here, where the Republicans could vote for Donald Trump, and that Mark Kelly could, in fact, win the Senate here. So it's something to watch here in the state of Arizona, George.
Whit Johnson, thanks very much. Let's go next door to Matt Gutman. He's in Las Vegas right now. Only about 7,000 votes separate the two candidates in Nevada.
Yeah, just about the number of people who can stay at the Mandalay Bay Hotel behind me, George. So that razor-thin margin is one that the Biden camp obviously hopes to keep. Now, the Secretary of State says that they're going to reveal unofficial results tomorrow morning. We don't yet know what they are. They say that in many counties there are outstanding ballots. Those are the people who did mail-in ballots that arrived either on Election Day or after, and the people who registered to vote on Election Day and then voted on the same day. We don't exactly know how many they are. The state won't say, but the Biden camp tells me they believe there are about 60,000 of those votes. And because the bulk of them are coming from Washoe County, that's Reno, and here Clark County, Las Vegas, they believe that heavily favors Joe Biden. So they're feeling pretty good right now, even though it's a pretty thin margin. Haven't heard from the Trump camp about that, but it may not quite be over. The president still has a chance to contest it. There is no minimum threshold for contesting and demanding a recount, which means the president could still demand one. So we might not know for quite some time. The state says that it reserves the right to have official results on November 16th. So could be quite a while, George.
Matt Gutman, thanks very much. Let's bring in Aaron Ford now, the Nevada Attorney General. General Ford, thank you for joining us this morning. Tell us where things stand right now in your state.
Thanks, George. First, I want to say that I'm incredibly proud of Nevada's elections this year. All the evidence, whether it's been in court or otherwise, has shown that our state has conducted a fair, safe, and secure election, and that Nevadans were able to exercise their constitutional rights to vote during the pandemic. And, obviously there's consternation about the time it's taken to count, but election workers, I believe, should be receiving our commendation, not condemnation. But to your point, to your question about where we are on the precipice of some decisions. We will get some additional numbers out tomorrow from both Washoe County, which is where Reno is located, and down here in Las Vegas, where I'm located, in Clark County. And we think that we are getting close to a decision.
Why is it taking a little bit longer? I know you had well over 90% of the vote in mail-in vote and early vote before Election Day. Have there been any problems in the count?
No. So listen, it's taken longer than normal this year because every active voter received a mail-in ballot this year. Our legislature, in its infinite wisdom, and I agree with them, decided to have every active voter receive a mail-in ballot so that they could exercise their right free from potentially exposing themselves to COVID. And so many voters chose to use that mail ballot. Processing mail takes time because election officials must ensure that no one casts more than one vote. And counting ballots is also taking time because we have many safeguards in place to prevent fraud, such as signature verifications, unique barcodes, and other tools. And in addition, ballot counting, it should be noted, is overseen by a bipartisan counting board in each county in Nevada. So to your question about concerns, we have none. It's just taking time because the results, there's only one result to an election, and that's when every vote is counted, and Nevada's going to do exactly that.
General Ford, thanks for your time tonight. I want to go down to Georgia now. Steve Osunsami is there.
Stand by. George, it started off as a dream on behalf of members of the blue team that they could actually win the state of Georgia. And at one point, the president was up about 200,000 to 300,000 votes. But currently, Joe Biden is only down about 33,000 votes. And it is now mathematically possible that Joe Biden could do what Barack Obama could not do here twice. Now, when you look at the numbers, there are about 100 to 120,000 absentee votes that the state and now different sources agree are still out there that are being counted tonight. And about half of them are in blue counties. A good number of them are in Fulton County, the largest county in the state. About 8,000 of those votes are in DeKalb County, which is a majority black county, one of the bluest counties in the state. However, when you look at the math and you look at how those votes are breaking in those particular counties and you look at what's out, the math that I see doesn't quite add up to Biden being able to overcome the president, even though that vote is so close. But stranger things have happened, and it is entirely possible that Biden could win. Fulton County is promising to count every single vote. They've got about 24,000 votes, they're telling us. They just told me that they are going to work all night to get those votes counted. George?
Steve Osunsami, thanks very much. Let's go up to Wisconsin right now. Deb Roberts in Wisconsin. We see the results, basically a mirror image of 4 years ago.
That's right, George. You know, the votes are in right now, but the process is far from over. And as you say, right now, it looks like Joe Biden is about 20,000 votes ahead, about the same margin that Donald Trump had 4 years ago. Wisconsin is accustomed to these razor-thin presidential races. In fact, this would be the fourth time in 6 presidential elections where it was decided in less than a percentage point. But also, recounts are a big deal here, too. They do those a lot. And election officials wanted to be very clear that they have nothing to hide here, that they believe in the integrity of what's going on here. In fact, they made a big show of it yesterday, streaming some of the results. We made a visit to one of these election sites and watched these workers meticulously feeding these votes and working on them. But I have to say, in some ways, George, a recount is still going on right now because these are unofficial results, as you heard earlier. They are still working on these votes, on these ballots and tallying them. There'll even be probably some kind of a random look at some of the machines to compare. So they make it very clear that this is a solid system. They run a tight ship, and they feel very strongly about how the votes are tabulated and that they did a good job here in Wisconsin. George?
Deb Roberts, thanks. One more big state is out there. It's the state of North Carolina. Janae Norman is in Charlotte.
Yeah, George, President Trump has that slight edge over Joe Biden by about 76,000 votes. There's still about 117,000 outstanding mail-in ballots. But if you're Joe Biden, that's not a whole lot to be excited about. He did what he was expected to do in those heavily urban areas, Raleigh, Durham, here in Charlotte, but he wasn't able to really run up the score in the suburbs. But the bottom line here in North Carolina, we're not anticipating to have final results until sometime next week. Absentee ballots postmarked on or before Election Day have until November 12th to be received. They'll be counted on the 12th and 13th. So this isn't even a case of seeing a slow trickle and those numbers fluctuating and going up. In the next few days, they'll remain pretty steady until the 12th at the earliest, 13th at the latest. George?
Janae Norman, thanks very much. Chris Christie and Rahm Emanuel are standing by. We'll be right back.
When managing diabetes, you can't always stop for a finger stick. With the Freestyle Libre 14-day system, a continuous glucose monitor, you don't have.
Well, in a word, George, what they like is gridlock. A split Congress tends to be the best thing for the stock market, and that's exactly what we have. And if it is Biden in the White House, this also decreases the likelihood of tax hikes. It decreases the likelihood of increased regulations. And it also means potentially a smaller stimulus package from the federal government, but it means more stimulus from the Fed, and that has positioned to support stocks. George?
Rebecca Jarvis, thanks very much. Let's bring in Chris Christie and Rahm Emanuel right now for more on this. And Rahm, let me begin with you. What did we see last night? Huge turnout, basically on both sides. Joe Biden moving towards, he believes he's confident towards victory. Democrats underperforming in the House and the Senate. What's your big takeaway?
Well, there's a couple things I would look at. If the vice president, which I think will happen, wins Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania, actually it's two blue walls. The West Coast will have moved into the Rocky area, and then you have the Rust Belt blue wall. So it will actually be two. Second is the vice president made a note to this, and I think it's really, really important on the presidential level. In the last 100 years, there's only been three people that have knocked off an incumbent president: Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and Bill Clinton. Now, I love Joe, the vice president. That's a big group of people to be associated politically. That is significant. What did not happen, what was supposed to be a wave, ended up being a trickle. It did not happen in the sense of the Senate, the House, state houses. There was like a discussion of about 5 state houses flipping. So that did not happen. And look, I don't like the president. I don't like what he's done to the country, to the core and the character of this country. But it's purely stepping away and looking at politics. For 3.5 years, he said, I'm not moving 1 inch off of my base. And there are 25 million people that act like Trump voters, and I'm going to get them to show up. He did it. Now, to the Democrats' credit, we happen to nominate somebody who can actually measure and counter that. And that's what happened. To Trump's credit, he produced something he said he would do that everybody said was not possible without going beyond your base.
Chris,
Biden did something significant for the Democrats, build a coalition that had breadth.
No question the president defied conventional wisdom by always focusing intently on that base, but it appears right now, it's not over yet, that he may come up a little bit short. How does he absorb all that? How does he move forward?
Well, first off, he's a fighter. He hasn't given up yet. And I can tell you that the attitude at the White House tonight is maniacally focused on Arizona from a political perspective. That's where they think they can break through and create a new conversation over the next couple of days. And so that's where they're going to be looking to do it. If they don't do it in Arizona, I think they know that they've got a real problem then, and they're really, really swimming upstream. But that's where they're focused right now. Governor Ducey in Arizona is focused on that. That's what they're trying to do. But, you know, Ron was talking for a while about a blue wave, and he said, you know, we never really see it when it's coming. We underestimate it. We've had these conversations. We didn't have any wave. We had an undertow. That's what we had. We had an undertow. You're adding Republicans to the House of Representatives. The Republicans are keeping the Senate. We added a governorship last night in the Republican Party, and we flipped state houses at a time when redistricting is going to come. Those are all good things for the Republican Party moving forward. Whatever happens with the president, and while that would be a disappointment to Republican voters all across the country if it turns out to be that Vice President Biden's elected, there is a lot of good news for the Republican Party across the country from last night.
Let me follow up
so
on
I'll
that.
just say one other thing, George. It's not a rejection of Republican policies if, in fact, you win everywhere else except at the top of the ticket.
Two questions to follow up, and then I'll go back to Ron. Is it Trump's party, even if he loses, going forward? And if in the next 24 hours he doesn't break through in Arizona, Joe Biden pulls ahead in Pennsylvania? I ask you the question I asked Cecilia Vega. Does he accept that result, or do we see the fight go on?
On the first question, there will always be, it always will be part of Donald Trump's party. Part of it will always be Donald Trump's party. And in fact, in many ways, he's expanded the party into areas to make our party more competitive than we were in other places by inspiring the voters that Ron was talking about to come out. And then it's going to be the job of the next generation of the party, if the president is not reelected, to try to keep those folks while expanding it even further to try to win. In terms of the president's attitude, I said, I've known him for 20 years, George. I think he will fight to the end. I don't think this is one where, at least in the near term, and by the near term, I mean the next couple of weeks, I don't think he'll just throw up his hands and say, all right, it's over, unless some of the results become overwhelming. If he's behind by 150,000 in Pennsylvania, that might change.
Ron, we only have 30 seconds. Can Joe Biden heal this divide?
Absolutely. I think there's actually more basis of unity. If you look at the issues, like on environmental stuff, et cetera, the country's united, actually has agreement and consensus. I also think there's unity when you look at the people that feel most estranged, most alienated on different sides of the political spectrum. They use the same language that talks about that estrangement. I think Joe Biden's unique based in character understands both working class and racial alienation and estrangement.
Thank you both very much. We'll be right back.
I shopped for shirts online last night and body wash
Just for men.
Probably not. When you're talking about recounts, first of all, typically you're talking about a difference of a few hundred votes. Right now, the president in some of these states needs tens of thousands of votes. And then with regard to the actual lawsuits he's filed, they've been process-oriented. They're not about specific ballots and how ballots are being counted. That's when it would get interesting, is if it came down to one state and there was one count and it was all coming down to that. That's where a lawsuit could really make or break the entire election. We're not at that point yet. So the first thing the president needs is closer numbers. Then some of his lawsuits might make a difference. We're not quite there yet.
Thank you, Dan. Pierre Thomas, one of the big questions outstanding, what will the Attorney General Barr do? Will he join forces with the Trump campaign?
George, traditionally, the Justice Department has viewed vote counting as a state matter. Barr has been a close ally of the president and is a staunch believer in the power of the chief executive. So we'll have to see if DOJ would seek to try to help the Trump campaign. So far, no indication of that. Legal experts we've spoken to say such an intervention would be unprecedented, George.
Okay, Pierre, thanks very much. And Kate, I would think one other person in America who's most likely to not want to be involved in this, Chief Justice John Roberts.
I think that's right, George. So the president said last night he's going to the Supreme Court. Well, you need to have a legal argument to go to the Supreme Court. You need to go to the lower courts first. You need a legal argument. It needs to be, as Dan was saying, in a state that matters, and the vote needs to be close. And I don't think those ingredients seem to exist the way the map looks right now. I don't think the Supreme Court's very likely to resolve this election, and I think for our democracy, that's a very good thing.
And we will know a lot more tomorrow when more of the votes are in. We'll be right back.
Get more dental, vision, and hearing out of your Medicare coverage with the Visa Flex Card only from WellCare. The Visa Flex Card gives you extra money to personalize your Medicare Advantage plan. Use it towards items and services like dentures, eyewear, hearing support, and more.
And Chris, we see all those 49 results in the key battleground states. We see all this passion ignited across the country. The question for the next president, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, is how do you start to knit this country back together?
I think that is the question. And you and I have said so many times on the air, George, together that this is a polarized country, a divided nation. But to Lindsay's point at the top of the broadcast tonight, these numbers, industrial Midwest, 50-48, 49-49 in states that Joe Biden has won. In the South, North Carolina, Georgia, 50-49, 50-49. In the West, Arizona, Nevada will be pivotal, 49-49. Whoever wins this election, whether it's Joe Biden or President Trump, has an enormous responsibility, not just to bring the country together, but to bring communities together within these states where they are just so divided. And it was what Joe Biden campaigned on that I'm the one, and maybe to Ram's point, legislatures went Republican, the governorship that went Republican, the Senate looks like it's going to be Republican, but Joe Biden made the case that I can reach across, I can unite this country.
We saw the energy this summer as well, people coming into the streets of the country in a world where it often seems we don't even hear each other.
You're right, and I think that all signs at this point to this really being the winter of our discontent when it comes to this pandemic in particular. I think that may even take priority over the racial unrest at this particular time. And I think that the next president is going to really have to figure out how do you prioritize this jobs versus safety. This is something that really bore out in states like Wisconsin that are extremely hard hit by COVID. President Trump actually won this election in Wisconsin by 200,000 more votes than he did in 2016 in Wisconsin. So I think that's going to be a major issue.
Martha, you wear two hats, and you're chief global affairs anchor. You also traveled the country during this campaign and talking to Americans. I know so many of our adversaries see our division as a source of weakness. Did you see signs of hope as you were traveling?
I did see signs of hope, but I think this healing idea is going to be very, very difficult if Joe Biden wins and tries to reach out to Trump voters. I've been in touch with many of them today, and the Trump voters are suspicious. Of course, Donald Trump planted that seed last night immediately. Jonathan Gaspard, a young Trump voter in Dallas, said, "I'm concerned about reported irregularities," but I also asked him what it would take if Joe Biden wins to heal that divide and to bridge that divide. He said, keep tax cuts in place, protect the unborn, and allow a full FBI investigation into Burisma. In other words, be Donald Trump. But let me tell you something a little more hopeful here. Carl Wild, who is an Iraq War veteran, he voted for Trump in 2016, not this time, and not for Joe Biden. He voted third party. I asked him what Biden could do if he wins to bring the country together. He said, as far as I'm concerned, he already is. Over the last 24 hours, I've repeatedly heard him say that he will be everyone's president. He will represent those who did and did not vote for him, just like an elected official should do. He's acting like a leader, something I feel like America has been missing for the last couple of years. So, George, I really think we just have to remember, if Donald Trump loses those 68 million votes he appears to have so far, they are all people, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and it's going to be a rough road ahead for Joe Biden if he wins to try to heal that divide, but many do think he's off to a good start.
Martha Raddatz, thanks. Joe Biden did say today, Terry Moran, that he would be America's president if indeed he does have that opportunity. Easier said than done.
Much easier, but he might have a starting point. Look, tonight we're in the midst of this remarkable election, the middle of a raging pandemic, day two, so many of these close contests. And what's extraordinary about it is how ordinary it is, right? And it didn't have to be that way. You wouldn't have predicted it. The president of the United States, the president called out an army, his word, an army of 50,000 people that he wanted to make a show of force at the polls, and nobody showed up. And since the election, the polls closed.
Well, actually, everybody showed up, but peacefully to vote.
Exactly, but his army to show as a show of force, they didn't show up. And then since then, on Twitter and in the speech last night, he's called for the vote count to stop. Crickets. And I think what that tells you is that the irresistible force of Donald Trump through our politics has met the immovable object, which is Americans' reverence for the democracy. At the end of the day, the one bipartisan thing may be people still have confidence in the bedrock process of our election.
And you saw that also, I mean, and Byron Pitts, I want to go to you. See it in all the election officials we've been talking to, simply going out there and doing their job every single day. Beneath this rigid polarization is what you see churn and change across the country. The country really transforming before our eyes, the North moving in one direction, the South moving in another.
Yeah, George, it is America. I mean, history would suggest that America has always been divided since 1619, when the first slave ship dropped anchor into the muddy waters of American history in Virginia. I mean, we are a nation of other, right? And so oftentimes in our history, the other has always felt at the wrong end. I think for me, in moments like this, to try and figure out the moment, I look at our past. 1963, Medgar Evers said, "Freedom has never been free." Medgar Evers, we all know, the legendary head of the NAACP in Mississippi, who died in 1963. Not long before his death, he said, and I quote, "Freedom has never been free. I love my children and I love my wife with all my heart. And I would die gladly, if that would make a better life for them." Our history has always been complicated, George. It has always been muddy. It has always been difficult. And as that man said, who was prepared to give his life, in this great country of ours, freedom has never been free.
Never been free, Pierre. Thomas, the question is, do we all feel like we're engaged in a common project?
That is the question. And, you know, listening to the people describe the voting process today, the key word is empathy. Can people who believe different things, were raised different ways, come from different backgrounds, can they look at the other person and put themselves in their shoes? That is going to be the key question. And whether it's President Trump or Joe Biden, that process is going to have to start, and soon, George.
Ron, we talked about this during the campaign. Joe Biden modeled empathy during the campaign. And one of the questions was, is that enough in a president as he's trying to run? Is it enough to give him some kind of a mandate? He doesn't clearly have a mandate here beyond being not Donald Trump. He's also facing divisions in his own party.
Can I slightly switch this subject? One is, we're talking about what the vice president as president would do, which is a clear question and a legitimate. Actually, one of the things we're missing is what the American people's role is in that. It's not just what he would do, but what he would challenge you, using Kennedy, to also do. And in the act of voting, very peacefully, the American people took the first step. And I said the other day, and I still believe this, Donald Trump never intended this, but his one contribution to our country will be in heightened civic engagement. He didn't intend it when he said, "Only I can fix it." That was the voice of an authoritarian. The American people said, "No, we will fix it." And that's what happened yesterday. And Joe, the vice president's challenge going forward will be to always now to reach out and make the American people part of this exercise in a form of service. I can see it with my own kids.
That is the vice president's challenge. Chris Christie, what is the president's challenge if indeed this does not go his way in the next 24 to 48 hours in that process? I remember back in 2000, after the long process of Bush v. Gore, it had to be the hardest speech he had ever given in his life, had to go out, give that concession with grace.
Yeah, no, listen, George, the president has an obligation, for having been given the honor of serving as president of the United States, to pass that torch on in a meaningful way to Vice President Biden, if that's the result of this election. And the one last thing I'd say is, this is what we were fearing. We were talking about this for weeks. We were fearing, what if there's no real decision on election night? People were boarding up.
Called the nightmare scenario.
Right. They're boarding up streets in Washington, boarding up streets here in New York City. And yet today I walked around the city and it looked like any other day in the pandemic. Quiet, no protests, no violence. And that's why I think what Ram said is right. It's up to the people now to decide what kind of president they want to make of the next president. And they're got to be equal participants.
We shall see what has happened. The votes are actually still being counted. We don't have a result yet. We're going to have a lot more coming in tomorrow. We'll be right back.
I spent 9 years behind these walls for a crime I didn't commit. Becoming a lawyer helped set me free. Now the real fight begins.
Everyone is freaking out about freaking. It's a bloody body-swapping blast.
It's me, it's Millie.
So run to the theater, but don't forget your mask.
surmounted, the country's still ready to heal. Have a good night.